Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And today we are bringing you the Beat the Waiver Wire for Week 12. Easily our favorite video to make. So, we are hopeful that, you got some guys going into IR. Maybe you have Sam Laporta that looking like he's not going to play. A couple other guys that are probably going to be ruled out here shortly. Might have a couple open roster spots. And so these are the players that we recommend that you put into a spot or two that you have opening up. Also, we are trying to hit 325 subscribers. So if you are new here, you could hit that subscribe button. That would help us a lot. Smaller channel trying to grow. We would really appreciate it. And so without further ado, let's get into the players. So the first guy we're going to talk about here, obviously from a Superflex perspective, is Drew Lock. It doesn't look like Daniel Jones is going to keep the job out of the bye week. Adam Schefter reported that he doesn't think Daniel Jones is going to play another down. If you're confused as to why, if he gets hurt over these next couple weeks and can't pass a physical going into next year, then his contract has guaranteed money in it for that situation. If the Giants have determined that they're going to move off of him next year, they have to bench him so that he does not get hurt. That's kind of the reasoning here. So I do think that Jones is the better player. I don't think that's really why they're going to move off him. They're going to move off him to protect themselves financially next year. And so let's move into Lock then. So Drew Lock, he showed out a little bit in Seattle last year. I do think that there might be something here in your Superflex leagues. And he's got one of the best schedules coming up, right? We were talking about Daniel Jones, talking about Tyrone Tracy, how these guys have really easy schedules coming up. And so, he's got Tampa Bay, Dallas, New Orleans, Baltimore over the next month. That might be the easiest passing schedule that you could even cook up in a lab. I can't imagine anybody really designating a better passing schedule than that over the next month here. So if you are really struggling at quarterback, you need somebody to be able to plug in as we roll towards the playoffs. I think that Lock is somebody that you want to try and get onto your team now. He's on bye, so the chance that he got added is pretty low. That news has not come out that Daniel Jones is benched either. So, there's just the thought that he might not, right? Schefter kind of reported it that way, not that he's being benched. And so he's only owned in 3% of leagues. He should be able to be rostered here by you. And if you get the news going into next week's preparation, you already have him. If they say that they're going to stick with Daniel Jones, maybe you can cut him and kind of play the waiver wire an additional week, maybe add him at the end of the week type of thing. But I think Drew Lock is the number one quarterback add for this week of guys that will be available.
Yeah, I had to add him in our Superflex league like a genius. Yep. I traded Jameis Winston for Daniel Jones. I thought, he's going up against the Panthers. This is a smash spot, and he's got an easy schedule. And then he might get benched. So unfortunately, I'm kind of in that scenario where I need quarterback help. So I definitely recommend doing that if you are the Daniel Jones owner, especially.
That trade, obviously, it looked like, the schedule was lining up. Daniel Jones looked like he was going to be in a good spot going into the bye, too, because they had an easy matchup before the bye, and then he kind of flopped in that game, too. Moving over to the running back position now, we've got Trey Benson as the first guy that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so Trey Benson's is coming off weeks of 8 for 37 touchdown, 10 for 62. We know that Benson's talent and measurables are off the charts, right? 6 foot, 215, 439 speed, 98 percentile athletic score. His career missed tackles forced per attempt of 0.39 in college was the best mark among qualifying running backs in the last 10 years. And I think with the Cardinals too, right? They're 6-4. And at worst, after this week, they'll be tied at the top of the division with the Niners, but they still have the tiebreaker going against them. They're going to need Connor to be healthy going into the postseason. And if Benson continues to be productive, could see him to continue to get even more carries. I think kind of in that 8 to 10 range is what we should expect. We'll continue to beat that drum that if you are a James Conner owner, that you want to make sure you have Benson on your bench should anything happen to Connor. In the fantasy playoffs, they've got the Patriots, the Panthers, and the Rams. So very good schedule. Really like him as a player as well.
Yeah, I'm happy you highlighted the measurables and how good of a prospect he was. This was my favorite running back in the class, even over Jonathan Brooks. And so to see him start to have a little bit of a success here, his snap percentages too. He was hardly playing at all, getting no carries. And then now he's in the high 20s in snap percentage and getting a lot more work. So, the touchdown, I will say, was a little bit fluky 2 weeks ago against Chicago. James Conner went it was like a 10 or 12-yard run or something. He went flying out of bounds and landed on on like the back and side. And I think he just got the wind knocked out of him. So Benson came on and walked in for the touchdown on the next play. But, I mean, it just shows he has the skill set. It's not like he's a small scat back that can't handle goal line work. Like, he is a monster in terms of size and speed. He can definitely handle that goal line role. And, we talked a lot about James Conner's injury history, but I mean, we're in week 11 now and he's still rolling. And if they're going to have Benson complement him on the ground, we might actually see James Conner last an entire season for the first time in his career. So knock on wood, obviously, as we're talking about that now. But I think Benson has standalone value at this point. He's a rookie, bye week. We talk about the bye week and rookies expanding their role. They kind of got him rolling a little bit more before the bye. They have time now to get him implemented, get him into a role. Another thing about his college profile that I didn't think was going to translate, but over the last couple of weeks, maybe it is. He didn't get a big opportunity in the passing game, right? Not a lot of targets, not a lot of catches, but he was always very efficient with those targets and with the catches that he did get. And then he's got 1 for 18 and 2 for 25 over the last 2 weeks in the receiving game. So it's like, well, maybe he can actually handle a little bit more of that role. So Benson is somebody I really like. If you're looking towards the playoffs, you need a bench running back on your team and you're in good standing and you're looking towards the playoffs. He gets New England in week 15, Carolina in week 16, and the Rams in week 17. That is an awesome schedule. So if anything were to happen to Conner, or even if you just are stuck, I think Benson's going to have a role at that point in really, really good matchups for him. Moving down to the next guy. So we have Gus Edwards here. So, I had kind of left Gus for dead. I did not think he was going to be good. Before his injury, he kind of had, his role had completely diminished. He had only 3 and 6 carries the 2 weeks before the bye, and then he was out for a month on IR. And then he comes back and has 10 for 55, 5.5 carry. That's the Gus bust that we know, and he got vultured on the goal line too by Hassan Haskins. I don't know that that's going to be the case. Like, he had a carry for like 8 yards down to the 1, and then they took him off the field and put Haskins in, and he punched in for the 1-yard score. So like if Gus had gotten that, or I don't think that's like a thing, right? And Gus could be in that role potentially moving forward. So, an 11 for 56 and a touchdown would have been a lot better of a line to be talking about here. But there is possibility with how much the Chargers want to run that he could be, worth rostering anyways rest of the season. I don't think he's going to get any catches. In PPR, he is really tough to even rely on at all. But if you're in half or non, I think he's much more viable. And Dobbins still got 18 touches in this game. This is not an indictment on Dobbins at all. I don't think that Gus is affecting Dobbins' value or role at all. I think Dobbins that's like the sweet spot for him. Again, he still carries a major injury risk. He did still hurt his Achilles last season, so it's like they should be wanting to try and keep both of these guys fresh. They should be wanting to be able to run the ball effectively as they try and secure a playoff spot. So, Gus back on the radar.
Yeah, I view it similarly to how the Cardinals and, wanting to keep Conner fresh. They both have aspirations of, a deep playoff run. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And, Greg Roman was on the mic saying the bus is back. Like, he was all excited. So I think anywhere in that 8 to 10 carry range is something we could expect. And we've talked about this too with J.K. Dobbins, like how his efficiency kind of dipped as Gus was on IR. I think this is going to be an okay thing for him overall. If he's still getting that 15 plus touches per game, he'll be a lot more fresh, which is important.
Moving down to the wide receiver position now, my top wide receiver claim for this week, 34% owned, is Adam Thielen. So I do think we had a little bit of back and forth on if we should even include him, but I do think that he has the opportunity now to step back into the number 1 role for the Panthers. He's getting activated off of IR, or he already has been activated off of IR. Sleeper is very nice with the fact that players on bye that get activated maintain their IR status until the following week. So if you play on Sleeper, you should be able to continue to stash him in IR this week. So make sure you get him, because next week if you look at the projections for next week, he's going to be one of the top receivers projected in your leagues. And I do think that there's a chance that he's just very good the rest of the year. He got hurt in that week 3 game, Dalton's first game, and he already had 3 for 40 and a touchdown, only played 30% of the snaps. And the first 2 games were a mess, obviously, for the entire offense with Bryce Young before he got benched. I do expect Young to continue to start. He has back-to-back wins against the Saints and Giants. So, if it was Dalton, I'd be much more in on this. But, Young has looked serviceable. And I think if it is Thielen, last year with Young, Thielen had a monster stretch through the first 6 games. And so I'm hopeful that after all this time off, he's healthy, he's fresh, that he should have a pretty good rest of season production.
Yeah, I mean, he had a 1,000-yard season with Bryce Young last year, and you mentioned that stretch, like weeks 2 through 11, he was averaging 10.5 targets per game. And if you look at the other positions, right, Leggett's a rookie, Coker's a rookie, Jatavian Sanders is a rookie, and while I think long term, I do like a lot of those guys, I think Thielen is going to kind of be that safety blanket that he knows and can run.
Yeah, and I think the schedule after Kansas City, right? Obviously, that's going to be a tough matchup in Week 12. It opens up a lot. He's got Tampa Bay, Philly, maybe not such a good matchup, but then Dallas, Arizona, and Tampa Bay in the playoffs. Like Thielen could legitimately be in a 3 wide receiver league, a starter during the fantasy playoffs. So, if you're struggling at receiver, get Thielen on your team now. And this is somebody too on Beat the Waiver Wire. It's only 34% owned. This is somebody I absolutely would be trying to plan a roster spot for the rest of the season. I think that he is very good and could really be useful for you. So this isn't somebody that, like we talked about Drew Lock, maybe that doesn't work out. You're going to end up cutting Gus Edwards. Maybe that doesn't look as good this week. End up cutting him. Like Thielen is my number one claim here for this video. I would definitely be trying to get him and stash him. Moving down to our second wide receiver that we want to talk about here is Adonai Mitchell.
With Mitchell, right? Like Pittman missed last week. They're also going back to Anthony Richardson. So there's a lot of kind of things in motion with the Colts. In terms of talent, right? This guy is off the charts. 6'2", 205, 4.34, 99.99 athletic score, which was 5th all-time amongst wide receivers since like 1987, I think it was. He profiles as a true X receiver. He's a man beater. He's a press beater. Everything, that you could want from like a potential number one at some point in his career. And to pour a little cold water on that, like, there's kind of some mental errors in his game and things like that he obviously needs to clean up. But this is the type of talent when it's a zero risk ad that you can easily cut next week if, they go back and he's the number 4 target on this team and Richardson is not good, where you can just wash your hands with it. But if he continues to ascend, and if that playing time last week was any indication of what it could be moving forward, I think it's a decent speculative ad.
Yeah, and that's part of our job on this type of video here is to look at major role changes. So I know Pittman was out and that facilitated the jump in playing time, but he could have continued to play as the number 3 and he didn't. He went from playing 20, he had 9 in week 8, 20, 23, 20, like that range of snap share to 94. So, obviously, like you mentioned, there's like so much flux from last week to this week with Pittman coming back and with a different quarterback, but put him on your bench. And if the role goes back to 20%, okay, you're good to cut him. If it doesn't, we might be in a situation where Adonai Mitchell is going to be a 100% ad, a recommendation everywhere. So like, we recommended Cedric Tillman the week before he kind of blew up and he went from nothing to like 85% with a bunch of targets. And that's not necessarily going to be the case because it's not like they got rid of Amari Cooper, right? They still have Pittman. They still have their full allotment of weapons. But if the organization, the coaching staff made the change here and that's going to stick, then we're in a situation where you're going to want to have that player down the stretch, regardless of matchups and all that stuff. So I like the call. Adonai Mitchell was my number 5 receiver in this class. I loved him. I could not believe he fell to the middle of the second round. I could not believe that the Patriots traded back and then picked Polk over him. I was like, dude, you need an alpha and you just drafted a quarterback. Like, why not take the number 1 true, like all of the tools, right? If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But like, why take the smaller, shiftier, supposedly best hands, even though he's having problems? Like, I don't know. I never really understood
that one
that.
too.
So I just was like so in on Mitchell in the pre-draft process.
Well, and the Chiefs too, man. Like your boy Brett Coleman, right after the Super Bowl, made a video saying if the Chiefs get Adonai Mitchell, like everyone else is toast, and they traded up for Worthy when they could have easily had him. And I know I wasn't as high on Worthy as a lot of people. I had him number 8 in the class, but man, maybe they were getting this one. But we'll see how 80 continues to grow.
I was really down on Worthy too. I know when everybody saw that they traded up with the Bills and then took him, right? And they get this big speedy receiver, or this big time speed receiver for Mahomes. I was like, I don't know. Isn't he just going to kind of be MBS? Like, isn't that kind of the role he's going to play? That's what we were worried about. That's kind of what's happening with him, unfortunately. Now, I do think he can develop, but Adonai Mitchell I think would have been such a great fit there. Fits in with the skill position fumbles for the Chiefs, right? After drafting Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I don't trust their first round skill players anymore over Jonathan Taylor. All right, so moving off of Adonai Mitchell now, we're going to move to another guy that's still a young player in his third season, is John Metchie for the Texans. He's only 11% owned. I for sure thought that he was going to be picked up in more leagues. I mean, Hutchinson got speculated on, like Tank Dell hasn't exactly been playing super well. And he went off in this game without Nico, right, when he got the opportunity to play more. So, Nico's been out for a while, but he played 63% last week and then 65% this week, and he went 5 for 74 and a touchdown. He looked pretty good out there too. And if you don't know Menchie's story, right, he was a second round pick 3 years ago, and almost immediately after got diagnosed with leukemia. He has since beat it, right? He is in remission, and he came out this year, like was good in training camp. Obviously came out to a slow start in terms of playing time, but this is a player that's extremely talented. Feels like he could be moving into the number 3 position without Diggs in the offense. And, they run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. If he's going to play 65% of the snaps in this offense where he's not going to get a ton of attention on him, I do think that there's a path here with Stroud that he could be relatively productive if he is going to be the number 3 target in the offense.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned his story because it was so great to see him play really well in this game. And I always really enjoyed watching Metchie in college. He was always that like really reliable number 2 or number 3. And if you're saying like, well, if he was a 2 or 3 in college, that might not be the best sign. But when you're sharing the field with Jameson Williams, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, that just sort of happens. But I think
he went to Bama for anybody that doesn't know. He was at Bama, right? And he was very productive. He played, right? So saying he's at number 2 is not a knock when you have literally some of the best receivers in the NFL currently.
And he was always just so stable, reliable. So I'm really happy to see him make a step forward. And I think with the return of Nico Collins, that's going to open up this offense a ton, right? And like you mentioned, the number 3 receiver on this team could be very valuable. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out with, Xavier Hutchinson and their playing time, things like that. But, that's what's great about these beat the waiver wire guys, right? Like that's the same thing we talked about with Adonai Mitchell. Like take it to speculative ad. If it goes way down and he's invisible, like just cut him.
Yeah, definitely. So, again, those three players, I really like those 3 players. And honestly, I have Metchie and Adonai Mitchell in my dynasty league. I definitely expect that I am going to try and hold them anyways. And, Thielen, not so much in dynasty, but in redraft, I would make Thielen a little bit of a priority. But if you have an open IR slot, right, you could pick up Thielen, slide him into IR, and then pick up one of these other guys as well and take the speculative ad, see how it shakes out going into next week. When you're doing your roster prep for next week or waivers for next week, you can make the decision at that point. But I think just taking a peek and, even if you just follow these guys and you hadn't had them on your radar before, could be fun at this point in the year too, as these rosters kind of, we have less guys that are like popping off for huge weeks or huge role
they're
changes.
fun to root for, right? The young promising talent, right? It's fun.
Yeah, and then also who they are for next year. You see, you pull up a ranking set, and at 128 you see Adonai Mitchell, and you're like, oh, I had that guy last year. I know who he is. So that could be good as well, just so you kind of learn about a couple of these guys if you didn't otherwise know. Moving on to defenses now. So obviously this is the part of the show where it's probably the most valuable, so you don't have to spend any fab. And if you have a spot, you can throw your defense on there for next week. And then you have an easy cut for whoever you're going to play this week, basically. But the defense we want to talk about is the Denver Broncos. So they are currently 49% rostered. So they're right on that cusp of, the 50% that we talk about. And they get Atlanta this week. So, a lot of people might have cut the Broncos a couple weeks ago, really, because they've gotten Baltimore and Kansas City the last 2 weeks. The chances that somebody was playing the Broncos defense during that time is not very high. And the chances they got cut, as the data shows, is really high. So Atlanta, obviously not the best matchup. I know in a league, I'm currently just going to play the Broncos against Atlanta, so I get this next stretch of games. But in week 12, they get the Raiders. So that's the week we focus on, right? If you're adding them to your bench, if you have a good defense for this week, play them. But then the Broncos next week get the Raiders. The week after that, they get Cleveland. I'm all about playing the Broncos defense during those two matchups. I think they are going to be projected above 10 points, as they should be. I think they can score double digits in both of those games. They're the number 4 defense. When they get a good matchup, they have generally performed really well. So I like the upside, and I like the ability to play them multiple weeks. So I'd be trying to get the Broncos defense on my team if I could.
Yeah, and the last time they played the Raiders, they scored 17 fantasy points. And, we know, and we love Jacoby Myers a lot on this channel, but I would assume that Surtain will give him a little bit more attention than he did the first time. I know Myers had a pretty big week, but not as much against Surtain. But, we try to stress so much, like, to not spend fab on defenses, right? And heading 1 week closer to the playoffs, like, this is the type of defense that if they're available on the waiver wire come Tuesday, like, somebody is going to pay up for them. So just right. Keep that in mind, because especially, it's similar, I guess, to like we mentioned with the Detroit Lions heading into, or on last week's show, where they had what was seen as kind of a tough matchup against Houston and then a very good schedule. So I think it's important that you can get a couple weeks out of these guys. And at one point, they were the number 1 defense in fantasy too.
Yeah, and obviously that's going to change when you play Baltimore and Kansas City. Like, right. You're not just going to maintain, right? So like that's kind of why they aren't up there anymore. But they're still 4, and they still can be very productive. It's not like they got worse. It's just the matchups are just really tough when you play 2 of the better offenses in the league. The other team I do want to mention for defenses, and we almost didn't talk about this team. We didn't really have it on our list, but I do want to mention the Kansas City Chiefs. They are down at 63% rostered right now, and they have consistently fallen throughout the week because they play Buffalo this week. So there's a chance that whoever's sitting on the Kansas City defense is waiting until the end of the week to drop them, because their next 2 matchups in week 12 and 13 are Carolina and the Raiders. Those are very good matchups. Kansas City is also going to be a very highly projected defense. They're currently number 23 on the season because they limit points really well. They keep score down, but they don't really do a ton in terms of forcing fumbles, turnovers, touchdowns. They only have one defensive touchdown in the year. So like, their fantasy points haven't really caught up, but those 2 matchups are worth getting the Chiefs on your team. If Denver's already gone, the Chiefs are definitely the team that I would look to next. And if you have a spot and somebody does end up cutting them because they get Buffalo this week, go and get the Chiefs on your team as well as an alternate defense that you can look into.
Yeah, set your notifications on, whatever app you use, because that's likely to happen at like 9:50 in the morning or whatever, when a lot of those roster decisions are made, and go ahead and pick them up if you can.
All right. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching. Again, if you're still here, hit that subscribe button for us. We are trying to get to 325 in the next week or so. So that would be awesome if we could. And we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Good luck this weekend.